Good afternoon, everybody. This is Merit Sukovich. I'm here with Sabrina Paganoni, also Marianne Chase and Lindsay Pothier from the Healey Center. We're here to give an update on the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial and have plenty of time for your questions and for a dialogue. Next slide, please. If you have questions, and some of you sent them in advance with a thank you, we have those. If you have questions during our brief presentation, you can type them in the question box. And then we'll, when we're done, and we have maybe about like 20 slides, we'll answer those questions and try to get through all of them. Next slide, please. What we hope to do today is give you an update on the status of the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial, talk about some of the changes we've made to the protocol so that we can conduct it very safely and get good results about whether the drugs are effective or not in this time of pandemic throughout the United States. Update on where we are in starting enrollment and how to stay in touch and to find a site near you. So those are our goals for today's webinar. Next slide. As many of you know, have been on our other webinars, this platform trial idea really took a community to come together to build it, to figure out how to do it, and to really launch the first platform trial for people with ALS. We've collaborated with our patient advisory group and many other patients who have given us input into the design of the study with our colleagues throughout the United States and NEALS who see patients with ALS, and our researchers, with our lab-based colleagues who are developing new drugs, with our industry partners, and with the FDA to come to what is, I think, a very good design of the trial to really get clear answers about whether these drugs work, and to also really accelerate how drugs are developed for people with ALS. So we're very excited to be here today to tell you that we're ready to start enrollment. Next slide. As I mentioned, we didn't do this alone. Really, the vision came from a good friend and patient of mine, Sean Healey, who unfortunately recently passed away from ALS. But he was really the vision, asking me what he could do to make a difference to accelerate ALS. And when we proposed this platform trial idea, he loved it and wanted to help bring it forward as fast as possible for people with ALS. We're very grateful to partner with also the ALS Association, who's given us a grant for the platform trial, Tim Green and his family through Tackle ALS, ALS Finding a Cure, ALS One, Salsa for ALS, the Arthur Blank Foundation, and a few other groups, including the Ice Bucket Challenge 2 that Brian Wallach and others launched. So we need a lot of people, a lot of support to get this off the ground. We'll work closely with our NEALS consortium, our colleagues at Barrow Neurological Institute, and we really brought in the top statisticians for platform trials, Barry consultants, who are now, besides being experts in platform trials, are experts in ALS clinical trial design and biostatistics. So for this, for the launch of the platform trial, we're partnering with 4 companies, UCB, Raw Pharma, Biohaven, Clean, and Prolenia. And it's been a pleasure to work with them as well to bring this forward. Next slide. I'll pass the mic over to Dr. Paganoni, please.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. We are so excited about the HEALEY ALS platform trial because it does offer several benefits over traditional trials. And as you can see on the slide, the HEALEY ALS platform trial is expected to cut drug development costs by a third, and to cut the time that it takes to develop these drugs by over 50%. So essentially, by simply changing the design and arranging a shared infrastructure with a common protocol and common processes, we can make the trial much more efficient and running individual trials. And so we will be able to test multiple drugs in the context of one protocol, one master platform trial. And we're going to start the trial over the next few days or weeks in the summer of 2020 at 54 locations, 54 clinics and hospitals around the country that are part of the NILS consortium. And we will be able to test multiple drugs in a more time-effective and cost-effective manner. So we're going to start by testing 3 drugs that we call regimens, regimen A, B, and C. And all of them will be tested using the same protocol and shared infrastructure and processing. And most importantly, we will share data from placebo participants. This is a very important point from a patient perspective, because that means that we increase the chances of being active compared to placebo by three, which is obviously a great advantage compared to traditional trials. As you can see in the figure on the right, patients will enroll in the platform trial and will be assigned to any of the available regimens or treatments, A, B, or C. But then within each regimen, there's more chances of being on active than on being on placebo. Specifically, for every 4 people who enter a trial and a regimen, 3 of them will receive active drug and only 1 will receive placebo. And then at the end of the trial, all the placebo data will be shared so that we can compare each drug against a common shared placebo group. Next slide. So these are the 3 regimens that we're going to start with. So regimen A, B, and C actually correspond to the first 3 drugs. Zilucoplan, which is manufactured by UCB Ra Pharma, verdiperstat, which is manufactured by Biohaven, and CNM AU8, which is manufactured by Clean. Importantly, the testing, the placebo-controlled trial only lasts 24 weeks, or about 6 months. But then each one of these regimens will offer an open label extension. So what that means is that every person who is randomized into any of these regimens, again, first of all, will have more chances of being on active than placebo. And then at the end of the 24 weeks of testing, regardless of their previous assignment, everyone who desires to can enter an open label extension if they completed 24 weeks of the study. And so they will be able to receive the actual drug, the active drug, for at least 1 year. So all these different treatments were selected by a group of very expert ALS scientists, and they based the selection on a competitive process based on lab data, preclinical data of these compounds, as well as previous experience in human trials in different neurological diseases that basically informed our knowledge about the dose and the safety profile of these drugs. And so they were all judged to be ready for kind of this large scale and important trial to be able to test the effectiveness of the drugs for ALS. We will start with the first 3 treatments, and then the 4th treatment will be added soon in 2020, and then we're already in discussion with 3 companies for 2021. So we were starting the trial with these drugs, but we continue to expand it, and we will add more drugs over the next few months. Of note, these first 3 drugs all target different mechanisms because we have so much more knowledge about the mechanisms, the cellular and molecular pathways that cause ALS, that we really wanted to really try to block multiple mechanisms and see, how they perform. And we're basically targeting mechanisms including the immune response. Specifically, zilucoplan works on complement activation. We know that from previous data that complement activation might have a role in ALS pathogenesis, and so we really it's very important to test whether this drug that blocks complement activation, we want to test whether it will be able to stop the progression of ALS. Verdiperstat also works on the immune function but through a different mechanism. Specifically, it blocks the inflammation, excessive inflammation in the brain that affects a specific cell type called microglia. So it's an inhibitor of an enzyme called myeloperoxidase that's implicated in microglial activation. So the goal here is to block that type of abnormal inflammatory response in the brain. And then the drug at the bottom, CNM AU8, is actually a brand new drug that is very interesting. It's nanocrystals that affect cellular metabolism, and they've been shown in some models to increase the ability of the cells to utilize energy. So again, a different mechanism, and it's great that we can test drugs with that target different targets in the cell and in the brain, and all of them, again, we're going to test their efficacy and ability to slow down or stop the disease. Next slide. So as you know, we were hoping to start the trial earlier in 2020, but then when COVID-19 became a pandemic, we realized that most centers, including the 54 that are scheduled to be part of the trial, experienced a number of major disruptions to their normal workflow, and we're listing a few here. First of all, many centers experienced limited to no ability to start new studies or enroll new research participants. So this was actually explicitly prohibited in many sites, and some sites are still experiencing those restrictions because those hospitals or clinics were focusing all their efforts on the COVID-19 response. And so the sites could not open new studies or enroll research participants. Many sites, including many of our ALS clinics that are part of this project, experienced redeployment and furloughs of their staff. So some people were asked to go and be active responders in the COVID-19 pandemic, including nurses and physicians who had to work in different departments. We also experienced a lot of restrictions on access to the clinic and research areas. So most people started working remotely, and many people are still working remotely. And that's great because they can continue to work on administrative tasks, but they've not been able to actually go to the clinical research areas in person and interact with research participants. Some procedures have been restricted, and of relevance to ALS, as most of you know, we oftentimes test respiratory function, which is important for several reasons, both for clinical management and for research. And this particular test has been prohibited at many sites and remains prohibited in some parts of the country to this day. And that's because the procedure can generate cough, and so the concern is that asymptomatic carriers of the disease or of the virus could actually spread the virus if they were to do this procedure. So again, this is to protect staff and other participants in the procedure. Obviously, there's a lot of regional variability, and all of you have seen that on the news, and so we don't really know what the kind of the pandemic waves or how they may develop over the next few weeks. And what this means from a trial perspective is that some sites have experienced different barriers at different times, which might affect their timelines and their participation. So unfortunately, we were not able to start earlier in the spring, but as we will discuss over the next few minutes, we're now moving forward. Next slide. We continue to work with the goal of starting the trial as soon and as safely as possible. We gave an update in April, and as discussed there, lots of activities continue to happen remotely, and specifically, we could continue to work on training the sites, training all the coordinators, ensuring that everyone who's going to participate in the trial is trained on all the outcome measures and all the processes. And we continue to work on administrative tasks to enable site activation. And by site activation, I mean the fact that a site can be given permission to start enrolling participants. That means that all processes, all procedures are available at that site, and they can actually invite patients to participate. We also put in place a number of amendments to make the trial COVID-proof so that we could facilitate the start of the trial soon, and we could also make it feasible and sustainable, knowing that there are uncertainties about the pandemic and how it might evolve. Obviously, all of these protocol changes required careful coordination, so they took a few weeks to put in place. And obviously, we needed to to be in compliance with regulatory reporting and contractual requirements. We also saw a lot of other barriers, such as some limited availability of some services at this time, which again created the need to spend more time on these changes. But the good news is that we have now made a number of changes that are making the trial not only COVID-proof, but I think even a better and more patient-centered trial. So I'll give the mic to Dr. Sukovic for a description of these changes that are now enhancing our trial.
Thank you, Sabrina. Next slide, please. We really have spent the last 2 months on a SWAT team trying to make sure that this trial can be done safely, but also in a way that gives a clear answer about whether these drugs work or not. And we got input again from patients and our colleagues at Neil sites, as well as our pulmonary colleagues. A lot of people weighed in on how to do this. So we do feel like we have developed a good approach for this study, and hopefully, as Sabrina mentioned, for all ALS studies. So we've come up with several other options for the sites to use to determine respiratory function at their sites. This includes using the usual spirometer or a pulmonary function lab, as well as a device that people could use at home. And again, I do think that what we're learning here will help for every ALS trial, and hopefully will also help for clinical care. We've built in flexibility for some of the visits to be done virtually if needed for safety. If for example, an institution does say that research participants can't come in, we wanted to be able to have the ability to do those visits virtually. We are added the ability to use a home health agency for some of the visits to come and do the safety blood work in the home. Now, the biggest challenge here was actually finding a agency that was available. And we're hopeful. We haven't signed the contract yet, but we have a company we've identified, have bids from, are about to sign on. And I'll say here, the hopeful part is because we had picked another one and we were about to sign, and they pulled out. So these home health agencies are being recruited now from not just for ALS trials, but every trial in any disease, because it's not unique to ALS trials to have the challenges of around the pandemic. But we're pretty hopeful that we have an agency that will do this and do it well, and we do have the other approvals needed to do some of the visits in the home for blood draws. We've come up with a way to be able to safely ship the drug to participants' home at selected visits if needed for safety. And we've come up with the process really required by the FDA and other regulatory groups to collect the impact of the pandemic on the data. Because if, for example, for some visits, people can't come into the clinic, while we can do a lot of the assessments on the virtual visit, on the telemedicine, we can't do all of them. And so the FDA does allow that, but does require us to collect what we're not doing and the reason. We've added home spirometry to measure respiratory function safely in the home. Here again, we went to several companies that do this. We made sure to pick the one with that we thought would be best for people with ALS, and so we have picked that one, a company called MIR, and we're contracted for it, and now we're just working on the implementation, and we expect that will be added to the trial in the fall. Now, we don't have to wait for that to be in place to start, but we obviously want it to start as soon as possible. Now, while we've COVID-proofed the majority of the trial, there are still some visits that have to happen in person, particularly at the beginning for consent and enrollment, and at the end. And that's important so that we can collect the important measures of success of whether the drug's working. But again, we've tried to do this, again, with a lot of input from patients and caregivers and our colleagues to do this well. I do want to say now that our last webinar was April. It was hard for me to actually realize how much time had passed. I think we're all in some weird COVID time where we're working so hard we don't realize how much time passed. And so I am apologetic that we didn't give an update before this. I do reassure you that we were working very hard and all the time to be able to adapt to the situation, which no one expected, and to be able to keep doing this really pivotal trial. And so we do commit to having more frequent webinars coming updated, so we can keep everybody updated moving forward. Next slide, please. So Sabrina, I'll pass the mic back to you for how to find the center.
Thank you. So as we are, moving closer to activation, and so that's very exciting. We want to provide information about how to find a center near you should you want to participate in the trial. So the website, the link is on the slide, and if you go on the website, you'll find a list of participating sites. You can see the map on the slide, and then the arrow points to the list of participating sites. I don't have all of them on the slide, but on the website you can actually click. They're listed by state, and every center will have also some kind of a name of a person who is the main contact person at that particular site. So their email and contact information will be there so that you can directly contact them. Next slide. There are other websites also that can be useful to find more information about the trial and also find contact information. So I just want to highlight the NEALS website. NEALS is the consortium of clinical trial sites that are participating in the trial. Again, at 54 of them will be available to enroll participants over the next few weeks. So you can just go on their website and search for a trial, and if you put in platform trial, you'll then be directed to a list of participating sites. As always, you can also check clinicaltrials.gov. The trial is a great, the site, clinicaltrials.gov website is a great site to find information about all research, not just about ALS, but because it contains so much information, it might be harder to navigate. So I just listed on the slide the identifier or our clinical trial number. So if you put in the number, you'll go directly into our trial, so that it's easier to find the locations of the trial and additional information. Next slide. So we also have other opportunities and ways to remain in touch. So I just wanted to share the phone number and the email address of our platform trial research navigator, who's a central person, a central coordinator, who's available to answer questions that you might have about the trial in general, also about locations or anything else that you want to ask us about the trial. And you can also reach us as well through that email. I would also encourage you to sign up for the ALS Link newsletter. The newsletter provides information not only about this trial, but about other research opportunities. And there is a link there to sign up if you go on the Healey Center website. Next slide. And I'll pass it back to Merit.
Thank you, Sabrina. So I wanted to just give an update on where we are in site activation. So we have, as you know, 54 sites. To be able to start, there's actually a number of things that have to happen at a site. But I'm very happy to say that we have 31 of our 54 sites are very close to activation. So of these 54 sites, 16 have what we call IRB approval. And that is, we're using a central IRB. So there's one ethics review for the entire protocol, but then sites are added to it as they're ready. So we have 16 sites that are ready, and they're all now going through a final kind of training on the protocol. We had done the training in March when we were hoping to start, and then COVID hit, and so we're doing a refresher training for each of the sites. There's another 15 that are very close. In fact, 4 of those 15 are going in this Thursday to be added to the IRB, and the rest hopefully next week. And then the other 23 are still, working very hard, but some of them are closer than others. And again, this goes back to some of the challenges Sabrina mentioned, where at some institutions they're actually not allowed to bring in research participants yet, and the other ones, the research staff are furloughed. So every site has a slightly different situation, but we're very excited that we have more than half of the sites are really close to activation. The sites listed on this page are the 16 that are already as far as the ethics oversight. And I think 15 of them have their contract, and we're arranging all the training. So I think the first 2 sites that will be activated are MGH and Texas Neurology with the rest shortly afterwards. So this is definitely progress. And of course, our goal is to try to get all 54 activated this summer. But again, the only reason someone isn't ready is related to the pandemic, because every site investigator wants to get this off the ground for their patients. Next slide, please. So I did want to talk a little bit about a new idea that we would like to add to the platform trial. And this idea came from our patient advisory committee. So thank you to them, where they asked us to think about, could we build an expanded access program in parallel to the platform trial? And this would be for people who perhaps were interested in being part of the platform trial, but for whatever reason might not be eligible. And could we have an option for them of expanded access for the same treatments that are in the platform trial? And I'll just say that we absolutely love this idea, and we would like to implement this, and we're working hard to achieve this goal. In fact, we did actually submit a grant application to start to build this EAP program. We should hear in shortly, and we went in with one of the treatment arms for that. But our hope is to really build this up. We're actively fundraising for it. For expanded access programs, often the companies will provide the drug. And you can certainly charge some of the safety labs to insurance companies, but you do need some support for this. And we're super excited about this. And I know we have the support of our patient advisory committee, and we're working closely with them. Please visit our website for more information. We'll keep people updated on this. I think this is the way to go for really for the field, and I'm very excited about this. I think you can also design these expanded access programs to collect in a minimal way, but in an important way, information that can help actually show the effect of the drug in a broader population, the safety in a broader population. So you can do this in a way that helps everybody in the field. So we're very excited that we have this great advisory committee with great ideas, and we want to implement it. So we're taking up this charge as well. Next slide, please. So now I think we want to leave, good, we've left about half an hour for Q&A. I do want to remind that we will put this recording up on our website. It usually takes us a day or so to do that, but we'll have that up there. So I have the list of questions that came in before, as well as the new ones. And so I'll read them, and then Sabrina and I will just take turns answering them. And some of them I'll also ask Marianne and Lindsay to answer. So one of them is actually about expanded access, so we might have answered it, but I'll read it. It's, do you have information about expanded access on some of the drugs in the trial if you're not eligible because of being greater than 36 months, and who can you contact about this? So so as I mentioned, we're going to try to add this to that. Now there are other expanded access programs going on. We have several at MGH, but other institutions have them as well. I think the best contact, probably two contacts, is one is you can contact us through Judy Carey and the Healey email. I don't know, Molly, maybe if you can go back a few slides to the contact information, we can leave that up. You can also ask your neurologist, and if they've never done an expanded access program before, there are people at NEALS, including at the Healey Center, but also our co-chairs, Jinsey Andrews and Tim Miller, who can help them in how one asks for individual patient expanded access. And part of the grant that we recently wrote was actually to educate the sites, if they wanted, throughout NEALS, of how to do expanded access. So another question, and maybe Sabrina, I'll have you maybe answer this, or take the first try at it. Why are we still using placebo while there are biomarkers that have demonstrated being okay?
Right. No, that's a great question, and I agree that biomarkers are an important way of testing the effect of drugs. However, it's also important to determine the actual clinical effect of these drugs, to make sure that these drugs do not change only biomarker, but also have a clinically meaningful effect on clinical measures that we know are important for participants and patients. So that, for example, scales or muscle strength measures or respiratory function measures that directly assess and measure clinically meaningful activities, such as ability to breathe or ability to do things such as those measured by the ALS functional rating scale. So I think, you know, there's the clinically meaningful outcomes are still sort of the most important outcome, but biomarkers can definitely teach us a lot about the promise of a drug. And so one of the goals of the trial is actually of this particular trial, the platform trial, is to continue to develop these biomarkers so that we can more clearly correlate them with clinically meaningful changes. And then the hope is that in the future we could even use these biomarkers in a way to replace the clinical measures. I think the field is moving definitely in that direction. I don't know that we have enough information right now to completely replace the clinically meaningful measures with biomarkers, but we certainly one of the trial is to get more information so that hopefully we can do that in the near future.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, I'll just add in there that we actually do not have what's called a surrogate biomarker. We do not have a biomarker that can substitute for not having placebos, but everybody wants to develop that because that will definitely accelerate therapy development, and we are building the platform trial in a way to develop those biomarkers. Another question was, Sabrina, if you can answer this, about the open label. Is it only for 1 year? Is it same for all drugs?
Yes, no, thank you for the question. So first of all, we are very excited to offer an open label extension. Not all trials do that. It's not mandatory, but we're very excited that we got the collaboration and support from the drug manufacturers, and obviously we have a lot of support from the patient community to make sure that an open label extension can be offered. So as of right now, the first 3 regimens are offering an open label extension of at least 1 year for all people who complete the 24 weeks of double-blind placebo-controlled trial on study drug, and one of them actually could have a longer extension. Now, obviously, if the results are positive, we hope to be in that situation where we have positive results from one or more of these placebo-controlled trials, and if that was the case, the hope is that these extension studies would be extended even further. But I guess we are starting with that plan, and hopefully we can extend the timelines even further if we have positive results from the double-blind.
Thank you. So I'll take this question, which is not related to the Healey platform trial, but to trials in general. In your estimation, do the recent results of the NeuroOwn trial, phase 3, sound encouraging for curing ALS? And thank you for asking for that. So the NeuroOwn trial, which is by Brainstorm, is a stem cell trial that's in phase 3 trials. It's a blinded study where half the participants are on the treatment and half are on placebo. And it's 6 months of a treatment period followed by 3 months of observation. So nobody has those results. So it's still an ongoing study. It hasn't been unblinded, meaning so nobody knows who's on drug and who's on placebo, and the results haven't been analyzed. So we don't know whether it works or not. Those results are expected by the end of the year, according to the company. Now, they had done a prior phase 2 study, which was a single dose study, which has been published, and that certainly looked encouraging and gave kind of the rationale for moving forward to phase 3. But I think at this point, we do not know whether that drug works or not, but we'll know by the end of the year. There's one other phase 3 trial we're going to have results on before the end of the year, and that's by a company, Orion, and the drug is levosimendan. That's a drug that works directly on the muscle to help them contract more efficiently, and those results are expected in the fall. So we have 2 phase 3 trials we're waiting to hear results on in 2020. Okay. So a question for you, Sabrina, are these drug trials primarily for sporadic ALS and not genetic ALS?
So these drug trials are for all forms of ALS, so people can participate whether they have a sporadic case or sporadic presentation or a familial presentation. So people who have familial ALS can definitely participate. However, these particular trials are not targeted to specific genetic forms of the disease. So if you are interested in a targeted treatment, such as a gene modification trial for specific genetic mutations, then there are other trials, separate trials that are ongoing to address those. And so you may want to look into that as well. However, we certainly hope that the drugs that we're testing in the platform trial are applicable to all forms of ALS. And so for that reason, even people with genetic forms of the disease are welcome to participate.
So the next question is about the zilucoplan arm, and the question is, will the patients that are randomized to that arm be required to receive meningococcal vaccine? Sabrina,
Yes.
do you want to answer that one?
Yes, definitely. So the people who are assigned to the zilucoplan regimen will be required to receive the vaccination, and that's for safety. So whether they are on active or placebo, all people in that regimen will receive the vaccinations according to standard vaccination schedules for people who receive complement inhibitors. That means getting 2 vaccines at the beginning of the trial and repeating some booster shots at pre-specified intervals, again, according to standard guidelines. And I would say that those vaccinations are considered safe to take, and they're very important, obviously, to reduce the risk of meningitis.
Great. There's a question for open extension, and any of the 3 regimens may be used. Will I have advice to which one might be best for me? So I just want to clarify that. Let's say if you come into the platform trial and you're randomized to treatment A, or here, zilucoplan. After the 6 months double-blind period, you would be able to go into the open-label extension of zilucoplan. So people would stay in the open-label extension of the regimen that they were initially in, rather than go to another one. And there's a couple reasons for that, but the main one is that for the open label extension, while the main reason to do it is to give access to the people who were in the study, the other reasons to do it are to get longer term safety, and also a look additionally of longer term outcome measures that can help with an accelerated approval. So there's not a switching from one arm to the other in the open label extension. The other question, and I want, maybe I'll take a stab at this one first because it's related to the other question about placebos. But why can we not use historical data as controls instead of recruiting a placebo cohort? I just don't get the ethics of placebos for this illness when good historical data sets exist. So it's a great question, and our goal, of course, even with the platform trials, eventually to decrease even here the number of people on placebo. So the reason we can't use historical controls there's several, but one of them is that the historical control data suggests that the illness isn't stable over time. That actually, there's been a couple studies suggesting, in the good news, that people are doing better now than before because the care of patients has changed. It's gotten better, and the natural history is changing. So there are problems with using past historical controls. Now you can try to do concurrent historical controls, and there are efforts to look into how to do that well. But the other thing is something called a bias, so that if somebody knows you're on treatment or somebody evaluating you knows you, there's a natural bias to it, and so it can make in determining if a drug works challenging in a disease like ALS, where the difference between people is huge, where there's some people who fortunately have the illness 20 or 30 years, very slow course, other people very fast, and we don't have yet the tools to tell the difference. So if you have such a heterogeneous disease and you take all comers or a big group of people, it can be very hard to tell if a drug works if you don't have a comparison group. Now the platform trial is, of all the studies out there, the one with the smallest placebo group, and that's because of the design of it, so that because we're pooling placebo group, and we're able to use placebo data from at least the last 6 months. That's what initially. And if we can show over time that that's stable, we'll be able to use it even longer. But we could get, after the first 3 drugs, for example, if we could if we show that that placebo group is stable and can be used as a comparison group, we could go to 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 down the line. And also, if we develop an outcome measure like some blood marker that changes with the disease and is linked to the clinical outcome, that can become a surrogate marker and actually get rid of the need for placebos eventually. But we don't have at the moment either a good enough comparison group or that biomarker. But the platform trial is designed to provide that type of information as well as learn if these drugs work. So I think we're all on the same page that we want to eliminate placebos, but the field isn't there where you can do it and actually determine if the drug works or not, which we have to know. Otherwise, we're not going to move the field forward at all if we can't design trials to be able to tell if a drug works or not. So I think we came up with the best balance we could with the knowledge today, but with these platform trials, you can evolve as knowledge changes. And that again is the beauty of that. And that's what we saw happen in platform trials in oncology. So that was a bit of a long answer, but I think it's a really important point and one that we are talking about a lot and often. We're all aligned on that, definitely trying to get rid of that. So maybe this is a question for Sabrina. Can a trial participant try each one of the 3 drugs, or can each patient only get assigned to the one he's randomly assigned to?
No, great question. So, so people can complete one treatment arm and then move on to another one if still eligible. In other words, somebody could participate in drug A, for example, and then at the completion of the 6 months of the placebo-controlled trial, instead of going into open label extension for drug A, they could decide to come back and be screened again for inclusion into the platform trial. And if they're still eligible, they will be assigned to any of the other drugs. Not the same drug again, but they would be assigned to one of the other ones that are available in the platform. So it is possible for people to try more than one. But then obviously if people prefer to enter the open label extension, then they would stay on that instead. So we cannot provide multiple drugs at the same time to the same participant, or we wouldn't be able to tell which one works, but we can do it sequentially.
Thank you. This question, are all 3 drugs in oral form?
No. Yeah, so the regimen A, zilucoplan, is a subcutaneous injection, so similar to the way people inject insulin for diabetes. That's the same idea, a small syringe, sort of an easy injection to do, and people can, you can do it to yourself, or caregiver can do that for the participant. So the people who are assigned to zilucoplan will receive that injection, and the people who are in the regimen and receive placebo, they'll also receive an injection of placebo. Now, the people who are in the other regimens, for regimen B, the verdiperstat one, that's a tablet that needs to be swallowed whole because it's a delayed release formulation. So people will get either active or placebo with a tablet. And people who are assigned to regimen C, that's still oral, but it's actually a liquid. So you drink a liquid that you take. Again, it's like I believe it's a few ounces of a drink, and so that's oral, but in a different formulation, not a tablet.
Thank you. So there's a question which I'll try to answer. I've been told that having a U.S. phone number is absolutely mandatory for participating in the platform trial in Texas. Is that right? And then we also have some questions about Canada, so I thought I'd answer them. So in the protocol, which again was written kind of before COVID, we did not have any restrictions for where someone lives. And there have been, as you know, other trials that did require U.S. Residency, but we left it open. But we did have a requirement that people need to be able to get to the center and come back and participate in the site, but really left it up to the relationship between the physician and the team at the site and the participant of whether that would work for somebody. So we wanted to have that flexibility, and that still exists. So there's nothing in the protocol that requires having a U.S. phone number. However, we do need people to live close enough to a site that you can participate and get to the center, or if there's any safety issues that your team can take care of you. but that it really is up to the site and their relationship with their patient. As far as Canada, so I know I've spoken to several of you that we would like in kind of stage 2 of the platform trial to add Canadian sites, and we're in conversation with Dr. Genge about that. I don't think it's going to happen right now. Our goal right now is focused completely on opening these 54 centers and getting the platform trial off the ground. And then, as I mentioned, adding the expanded access protocol. But we are going to plan this year to go to Health Canada, the FDA equivalent in Canada, and to talk to them about the platform trial, just like we did when we started here at the FDA, see if they agree with the design, the approach, and assuming that's a positive, to start to work, really in year 2 to add at least 5, if not more, Canadian centers. So, so for when we launch now, no, there aren't Canadian centers. Could someone from Canada participate in a US site? Yes, they can. Again, if they have that relationship and are able to get to the site. Now, again, pre-COVID, that I think was feasible for people. I think it's harder now with the border challenges, but hopefully, this pandemic is not going to be with us forever, and things will get easier there. But we would eventually like to add Canadian sites. We're just doing it in steps. All right, so let's see the other questions. How many spots will there be across all sites? So I can answer that one. So, and I'm sorry, we should have said that. So each regimen is 160 participants. And so we're starting with 3, but as Sabrina mentioned, we do have a 4th one, Prolenia, that we'll be adding in the next couple months. So there's at least, if I do my math correct, 480 participants now, and then there'll be more. And then we are talking to 3 other companies that are interested in joining in 2021. So I think there are, plenty of spots, and we're just at the beginning, obviously, of enrollment. So another one is, can snowbirds start the study in one site in the summer and another in the winter? So we try to avoid this just because it's actually logistically very challenging for drug supply and other parts of the study. So we are asking if people could, at least for the double blind, the 6-month period, the 24 weeks, stay at one center. And again, because of some of the COVID changes, that might be easier for people now. With some of the remote visits, but then in the open label extension, I think there's a lot of room to be a lot more flexible on that, if that works for people. I've left my contact information with 4 of the 54 locations, all within 22-hour drive. Will their enrollment be rolled out sequentially or all at once? Sabrina, I don't know, actually, Marianne or Lindsay, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Hi, this is Lindsay. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. And there will be, as Merritt and Sabrina have presented, lots of sites that will be ready for activation to start enrollment. And so I think it's wonderful that you've looked at several different sites in your area who are participating in the project. And really, as Merritt mentioned, to really commit to that one site for the project itself. But there are areas, when you look at that map of where sites are, there are areas that have several different sites in that area. So that is an opportunity for looking at that. We will not be notifying which particular site in general is open immediately. However, the clinicaltrials.gov website will be updated for information about which site is enrolling participants, so that you will be have access to that information of which site is open. And so our true hope now is, as we're gearing up for activation, that a lot of sites will be able to open at the same time. So we're all kind of hands on deck here, trying to get every site ready to be able to open at the same time, knowing that patients all over the country are looking to enroll as soon as possible.
Thank you. Molly, while we're talking, could you go back to the slide that shows the 16 sites that are IRB ready? I just want to, because there's been a couple of questions about which sites are going to be activated. Yeah, so these will be what I think will be the earliest. And as we talked about, and Lindsay mentioned, there's many others close. But we will keep that information up to date on clinicaltrial.gov and our website. So there's a question, if a group is showing amazing results sooner than 24-week trial period, will that cause the group to move right to open label extension? So that's a great question. We do have what's called a data safety monitoring board that every trial in this phase has, and they look at the data for safety, but they also look at it for ethics. And we do have built in what we call futility stopping rules, which is kind of the opposite of what you're asking. But it's interim looks like if the drug isn't working or doesn't have a chance to work, it would be aborted early because we don't want people staying on something that might not work. We have given companies the option to do the flip of looking early for efficacy. That is a challenge because when you do that, the FDA actually holds you to a much more stringent statistical bar. So, and because the study is so short, you have a risk of making a mistake by doing that. So at the moment, we don't have stopping rules for efficacy early, but the DSMB always has a latitude that if they see something, like if they saw, you know, something that was a home run, right? It was making people better, let's say, they could bring that to attention. We could stop early. And in fact, that is something that's happened in other trials. For example, the first you know, HIV drug, ACT, was stopped early because it was so obvious that it was working. So there's always a committee that's unblinded and looking and making sure what we're doing is ethically correct. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Okay. Let's see. Someone asked what the phases of the 3 drugs are for the trial. And so their phase, what we call phase 2-3, meaning the trial's designed to look for at efficacy. So all these drugs have preclinical data that tell us that they have a good target, but also that we know what the best dose is in people and have some safety in people so that we could go to phase 2 and 3. It does mean that if the study is positive, it can be considered a pivotal trial for approval. There's a question, if someone's just over 36 months from the first symptom, will they be excluded from the platform trial? COVID delays are excluding some people. And yes, they would be excluded. And we do realize that this is awful. Like if somebody was eligible in April, but they're not eligible now. And that would happen no matter when the trial started. And I think that's, again, the reason why we really love the idea of adding an expanded access program arm to this trial, and also making sure that people know about other trials. There are other trials that have different inclusion-exclusion criteria. And I know IMALS is creating a great website for that, and also our navigator at the Healey Center, Judy Carey and Danny, will be able to give people that information as well. So the most important thing is having lots of options so everybody has an option. This is for Lindsay. Maybe will you regularly update the list of trial sites as they cross the IRB threshold on your website?
That's a great question. I don't think we list specifically the IRB on our website, but we do hope that very quickly after they receive IRB approval that they will move to activation, and the activation we will list on the website. So maybe not IRB specifically, but soon after that.
Thank you. Sabrina, there's a question about does our model allow looking at synergistic drugs, for example, multi-drug type trials?
So at this time, we are testing each of these new experimental drugs, you know, one at a time, so not in combination. However, I would want to emphasize that standard of care, riluzole and edaravone are allowed as long as people have been on a stable dose and are tolerating those drugs. So in a way, these drugs that we are testing are in combination with standard of care if people decide to take the standard of care medications. So I think really what we're looking at is what additional benefit can these drugs do on top of standard of care. So that's one part of the answer, I guess, to your question. Generally speaking, the platform trial design can be used, and in fact has been used in oncology to look at combinations. So for example, let's say that 2 of these 3 drugs, for example, are extremely positive, then one could imagine adding another arm in the future where you look at the actual combination of the 2 together to see if there's a synergy, but we're not planning on doing that right now.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question about the biofluid samples. If we're collecting spinal fluid and blood, and will they be available to researchers for biomarker work? And absolutely, we are collecting, we're asking participants to contribute blood, and if they want, it's optional spinal fluid, and that goes into a repository that's available for anyone studying ALS. And that's how we want to push the field forward on those important biomarkers. There's a question of whether someone has to be definite under the Ellis-Scoria criteria to be eligible. And the answer is no. This is a broader criteria than some of the other studies you've seen. So people can be, you have to have ALS, but those criteria could be possible, lab supported, probable, or definite. The clinical trial entry criteria are posted on clinicaltrial.gov. We have a few questions asking about that. So they are publicly shared. There's a question if an 87-year-old person can participate. And I actually don't remember if we have an upper age cutoff. Do you know, Sabrina?
We don't, no. We only have a minimum cutoff of 18, so you need to be an adult. But there's no upper bound.
Great. So someone's asking if we're collecting full genomic data on study participants so you can discern the efficacy of various drugs and different genotypes. And yes, we are. So again, it's optional for participants to provide their DNA for that, but we do want to do that, and that's a really important thing to do that we've learned from other trials. There's maybe the last question, because there's a couple questions about the Amylyx drug. And it's maybe Sabrina, since you're the PI of that. Will Amylyx be part of future Healey trials?
So so I don't know exactly, you know, what the next steps will be for the Amylyx drug, and I think, you know, if the drug were to be approved, then it will become an approved drug, just like riluzole and edaravone. As I stated earlier, any approved drug approved by the FDA will be allowed as part of the standard of care. So that's one path, you know, and if they decide, if they need to do another trial, there's obviously other pathways, but there's no specific plan to be part of the platform as an experimental treatment.
Thank you. And I think, even though I said that was the last question, I'll do the last one, because there's some questions about whether being in open label extension would cost participants anything. And no, it wouldn't. That drug would be provided at no cost, and all the visits obviously at no cost. It's obviously there's travel time and those kind of things, but there's no charge. And same for the expanded access program. There was a question about that. There wouldn't be a charge to any participants for that. So we didn't get to everything, but we got to a lot of the questions. We'll follow up and written answers to the people we didn't get to. But I did want to thank everybody for joining today, and we will plan to have these webinars more frequently. And we're hoping to announce the first 2 sites launched any day now, and the other 16 shortly afterwards. So thank you for joining us and for all your great questions. Thank you, Sabrina and Marianne, Lindsay, Molly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, bye-bye.